All right, welcome to day 3 of Unit 4. In your planner, you can write down day 3 as your homework. We're going to continue working with our special right triangles today. So I'd like you to have your warm-up out, and you can pause the video to work on the warm-up. When you're done with the warm-up, uh, hit play, and you'll see the warm-up gone over. So you can go ahead and pause the video now. All right, so we have a 45, 45, 90 triangle. Some other ways of 45, 45, 90 could be notated. You see the markings like that. That means the angles must be the same, and then you can fill in the 45s. You also could see a 45, 45, 90 where they have the angle markings on there. If they're the same, they must be 45, 45, 90. So 3 different ways that you could see the 45, 45, 90. So they said each leg is 5. Well, this is just our D on this side. This is normally D square root of 2, so the hypotenuse should just be 5 square root of 2. All right, moving over to the homework. So in 1A, our D is what is across from the 30, so D is just 9. D radical 3 is across from 60, so we had 9 radical 3. And 2D is across from 90. 2 times 9 is 18. Across from 60 is D radical 3, so take that 5 radical 3 instead of equal to D radical 3. Divide each side by radical 3, you get D is 5. So across from 30 is just D, that's why X is 5. Across from 90 is 2 times D, that's why Y is 10. D is what's across from the 45. So since this is just D also, Y is 3. And since this is D square root of 2, we get 3 square root of 2. Letter D, we've got across from the 60 is 30, so D radical 3 must equal 30. Divide both sides by radical 3, so we get 30 over radical 3. And then we multiply top and bottom by the square root of 3, that step there. And that will give us 30 radical 3 over 3. Divide the 30 by 3 and you get 10 radical 3. So that's our D value. Well, across from the 30 is our D, that's why X is just 10 radical 3. Across from 90 is 2D, so 2 times 10 radical 3 gives us 20 radical 3. Across from the 90 in letter E is 2D, so 12 equals 2D. Divided by 2, you get D is 6. Since D is across from 30, Y is just 6. Since D radical 3 is across from 60, 6 radical 3 is your X. Across from the 90 in a 45, 45, 90 is D square root of 2. So set that equal to 6. Divide both sides by the square root of 2. And then in this step here, we multiply top and bottom by square root of 2, giving us 6 square root of 2 over 2. Divide the 6 and the 2, and we get 3 radical 2 for D. Since these are across from the 45s, they should just be D's, so that's why X and Y are both 3 square root of 2. In number 2, an isosceles trapezoid has base angles that are the same. They said were 30. Draw in your altitude, which forms a right angle, making this 60. So D is just 6. Across from the 90, this would be 2D. So 2 times 6 is just 12. An equilateral triangle, we want to remember all the angles are equal. So if you do 180 divided by 3, that gives us 60 for each angle. And then when you draw the altitude down, it splits that 60 on top into 30 for each of them. So it becomes a 30, 60, 90 triangle. They told us the altitude is 4 square root of 3. Well, that's across from the 60, which is D square root of 3. Divide square root of 3 on both sides, and we get D is 4. And I don't agree with my answer that I have written there. So if D is 4, this should not be 10. This should be 2 times 4, which is 8. That answer was not right. Find the length of an equilateral triangle whose sides measure 22. Well, that side should be 2D because it's across from the right angle. Divide by 2, we get D is 11. Across from 60 is normally D radical 3, so we'll have 11 radical 3. An isosceles right triangle means there should be two sides the same and two angles the same, which implies a 45, 45, 90 triangle. The hypotenuse across from the right angle is 18, so 18 is equal to D square root of 2. Divide both sides by square root of 2 and we get 18 over square root of 2. And then we do this step where we multiply top and bottom by square root of 2 and we get 18 square root of 2 over 2. 18 divided by 2 is just 9, so we get 9 square root of 2 for each of the legs, because across from the 45s would just be D's. And equilateral triangle, the sides are each 12, so that's 2D equals 12 because it's across from the 90, so D is 6. And the altitude is across from the 60, so it's normally D square root of 3, so we have 6 square root of 3. If you have a rectangle, short side is 10. The length of the diagonal is 20. Well, if this is 10 and if this is 10 and the hypotenuse is 20, notice this is like a 2D and that's a D, meaning this angle must be a 30 and this angle must be a 60. So the angle with the longer side, this one right here, is just 30. All right, so today is another practice day with our special right triangles. I would like you to flip somewhere where you have space in your packet and draw yourself a blank 60, 30, 90 triangle. And draw yourself a blank 45, 45, oops, 45, not 44, 45, 45, 90 triangle. So someplace blank in your packet. And we're going to give you 1 minute. See if you can label each of the three sides in the triangles in terms of our D's. Getting that down is the #1 thing you have to do to be successful on yesterday's stuff and today's stuff. If you don't have that down, it is impossible to be able to get any of the questions correct. So see if you can test yourself, see if you can get it right. So we'll give you a 60 seconds starting now. All right, so that should have been plenty of time to do one or two things. Either list them from memory, or if you're unsure, we have them in our notes. You could have flipped through your notes to get them. So everyone should have them on their paper right now. In the 30, 60, 90, smallest angle always has a D across from it. Same thing in the 45, 45, 90. Smallest angle has D across from it. So we know those all to be true. In the 60s, there were lots of hippies and they were very radical. So this has a radical across from it. It's D square root of 3, and this is 2D. This one needs its radical. It's D square root of 2. I always remembered in high school to help me with these is the 45, 45, 90 only has two different angle measures. So this triangle has the square root of 2. The 30, 60, 90 has three different angle measures. So this has a square root of 3. All right, we're going to go to page 14 to start today's practice. We've got a square. So we know squares have right angles. The diagonal will split those 90 degrees into 45 degrees. So really we've just got a 45, 45, 90 triangle. Across from the 90 and the 45, 45, 90, we know should be D square root of 2. This allows us to set up our equation. We'll do 6 equals D square root of 2. We'll divide by square root of 2 on both sides, giving us 6 over square root of 2 equals D. We need to rationalize the denominator, meaning we don't want any square roots in the denominator. So we multiply top and bottom by square root of 2. This gives us 6 square root of 2 over 2. And then the numbers without radicals we can divide. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So 3 square root of 2 is our value of D. Well, across from the 45 is just D. So x is just whatever D was. So x is just 3 square root of 2. All right, going down to 2, we've got a 60, a 90, meaning this must be a 30. The side we have is across from the 30. Hopefully it clicks that we know that's D. Across from the 60 should be D square root of 3. Well, we know D, so this should just be 7 square root of 3. So not much calculation we have to do there. In B, we've got a 45, 45, 90. Across from the 45 should just be D. So we already know our D. Across from the 90 should be D square root of 2. So we've just got to fill in our D and then multiply by the square root of 2. So the 4 square root of 2 is that square root of 2 is that. So square root of 2 times square root of 2 is just 2, so that's 4 times 2, so x is just 8. Moving over to page 15, we've got an equilateral triangle. Equilateral triangle, all the angles are also the same. So 180 divided by 3 gives us that they're each 60. And the one at the top gets split into 30 and 30 because it's an altitude. The value we have is across from the 90. That should be 2D. Divide by 2, and we just get that D is equal to 5. We want the value of x, which is across from 60. Across from 60 is D square root of 3, so x is just 5 square root of 3. In 4, we've got our markings for congruent sides in our right triangle, meaning our acute angles are congruent. Well, the only way they can be congruent is if it's a 45, 45, 90. Across from the 90 should be D square root of 2. So we can set up an equation that 4 is equal to D square root of 2. We'll divide both sides by square root of 2, and that gives us 4 over square root of 2 is equal to D. We'll multiply top and bottom by square root of 2, and that gives us 4 square root of 2 over 2 is D. Divide the 4 by 2, and we get 2 square root of 2 is D. Well, we wanted x, which was across from the 45. That is just D. So x will be 2 square root of 2. All right, moving to the bottom, the base of an isosceles right triangle has a length of 3 square root of 2. So an isosceles right triangle means you've got a right angle, and the legs, the non-hypotenuses, are the same. They told us the base is 3 square root of 2. We just saw if those legs are congruent, the angles should be congruent, meaning this is a 45, 45, 90. Across from the 45 is always D. Across from the other 45 should be the same thing. When you do area of a triangle, you just do 1/2 base times height. So our area is equal to 1/2 times our base of 3 square root of 2 times our height of 3 square root of 2. So this is 1/2 times 9 times square root of 2 times square root of 2 is just 2. So that's half of 18, which is just 9, and it's an area. So we should have units squared. All right, moving to page 16. A square has a diagonal with length 12. This is very similar to the warm-up, at least the picture. So we know square has all sides congruent. It's got right angles, so then these must be 45s. Across from the 90 should be d squared of 2. So we can set up an equation and do 12 equals d squared of 2. We'll divide both sides by square root of 2. And that gives us 12 over square root of 2 is equal to d. We'll multiply top and bottom by square root of 2, and that gives us 12 square root of 2 over 2 equals d. Divide the 12 and the 2, and we get 6 square root of 2 is equal to d. So that means each of these sides are 6 square root of 2 because they're across from the 45s. Well, an area of a square is just side times side. You could think length times width, but they're really just the same. So we have 6 square root of 2 times 6 square root of 2. So that's going to be 36, and then square root of 2 times square root of 2 is just 2. So our area here will just be 72. It's an area, so we'll throw on units squared. Moving down to the bottom, we want to find both x and y. Well, because we have the double markings, if 45 is that bottom left angle, this must also be 45, making this 45. If the middle part is 12, 30 minus 12 gives us 18. That 18 must be split up evenly between both these sides. So each of those must be 9. Well, that's across from a 45, so that's d. This should be d, and this should be d squared of 2. So x is just going to be 9, and y is going to be 9 square root of 2. X is the side with one marking, so we can call this x. If that's 60, we got 90, and we got 30. Across from 60 should be d squared of 3. So we can set up an equation, d squared of 3 is equal to 4 square root of 3. We'll divide each side by square root of 3. Those wipe out, and d is just 4. Well, x is across from the 90, which is always 2d. So x is going to equal 2 times 4, so in other words, x is 8. All right, next up we have an isosceles triangle. We know it's isosceles because we have the markings there. If it is isosceles, the base gets split in half when the altitude is dropped. So if that whole thing is 8, this is 4. And we can actually go beyond calling it isosceles because on the markings we know that's 8 and 8. And because the bottom is 8 as well, we know this must be equilateral. So now we can fill in our 60 and our 30. Well, across from 30 should be d, so we know d is automatically 4. Across from 60 is d radical 3, so therefore x should just be 4 radical 3. So some things we know in this picture. This should be 5. This could also be called x, and this could be 60. Across from the 30 should be our d, so d is 5. Across from 60 is d squared of 3, so x should be 5 squared of 3. Across from the 90 should be 2d. So y should be equal to 2 times 5, or in other words, 10. Moving down to E. We've got two different triangles here. Let's start with the left-hand triangle because that has an actual side length. We got 45, 45, 90 here. So now just note that D is a variable in our problem here. So I'm not going to use D. I'm going to use something else now. Maybe I'll use T. So across from 90 should be T square root of 2. So that's equal to 7 square root of 2. If we divide both sides by square root of 2, we get T equals 7. Well, that's what it should be across from the 45. So these are each 7, meaning that A is 7 and C is 7. Well, this 7 is across from the 30, so that's still our T in the other one. So across from, this has to be 60, this would be T radical 3, and this would be 2T. So B would be 2 times the 7 to give us 14, and D would just be the 7 times square root of 3, so 7 square root of 3. So when you have multiple triangles in the picture, try to start where you know an actual side length and then work to the other triangle. And we'll use that idea in our last one for the video. So in number 8 on the next page, we have two triangles. So I want you to think to yourself, which one should we start with, the left hand or the right hand? Well, we should start with the right hand because we have the 8 there. If we look at this whole stretch, those three are angles on a line, so they should add to 180. If this one is 90 and that's 30, that's 120. And 180 minus 120 leaves us 60. So this is just a 60-degree angle there. Well, conveniently, now we have a 30, 60, and a 90. Across from the 90 should be 2D. So 2D is equal to 8. And we end up getting D equals 4. Well, that means across from the 30, it's just D, so this side is 4. Well, if CD is 4, BC must be the leftover to get us to 10, so that has to be 6. That's our 60-degree angle there, because the other one's 30. Across from 60 should be D square root of 3. So let's go off to the side, and we'll do D square root of 3 should equal 6. And I should mention, the question asks us to find AB, so if we want, we can throw an X there. That's what we're looking to find here. We'll divide both sides by the square root of 3. So that's D equals 6 over square root of 3. Then we'll multiply top and bottom by square root of 3. That's going to give us that D is 6 square root of 3, and a square root of 3 times a square root of 3 just gives us a 3. Divide the 6 out front with the 3 in the denominator, and that gives us 2 square root of 3. So D is just 2 square root of 3. And D should be across from the 30. So therefore AB, or our X that we called it, is just 2 square root of 3. So the number one thing you can do is, if you don't have them memorized at this point, remembering your sides in terms of D's for the 30, 60, 90 and the 45, 45, 90. You'll want to have that committed to memory. You'll see it on the quiz that we have a little bit later in this unit. That's it for this video. Have a great rest of your day.